Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Professor Messer A+ study group, our live study group that we do every month, where I take your questions about the CompTIA A+ exam and we try to answer some of those questions. Sometimes we dive a little deeper into some of the information that you're looking for, and sometimes we ask questions about the test itself, because sometimes taking the exam is just as important as learning the content that's on the exam. You don't want to walk in and then not expect something. Don't get those unexpected test dates. That's always a problem. And the A+ exam is often one you always take first when you're going into IT. So it may be the very first time you've ever sat down for an exam. So we'll cover both content today and we'll cover some of those testing experiences as well. Thanks very much for joining me. If you're joining us live, and we always ask that you do, you can always go to the Professor Messer website at professormesser.com/calendar to see when we do these. And if you are watching live today, either on our Google Hangout, we are also watching a chat room at the Professor Messer website. You go to any page on Professor Messer, and there's chat right there at the bottom. You can chat with anybody who's on the site at this time. So I like to make it so that you folks can communicate back and forth. Don't just talk to me, talk to everyone else as well. The chat room I've got set up just for today is the live A+ study group chat room, and that's the one that I am looking at as well. Well, we got quite a bit to go through today. I'm going to step through a number of questions. You sent me a ton this month, and we really appreciate you sending those in. You notice I have a registration process to go through that's not really so much to give you the exact place to go, because it's easy to find the stream. It's at professormesser.com/live, but this gives you a chance to send me questions. This is also something I'm able to do because I have some people that not only watch my absolutely free videos on the internet, but they like to purchase a copy to use offline. And so we appreciate those folks as well. They help keep everything going and allow me to do study groups like this. If you'd like to also see all of the other things that we're doing here throughout the month, we also have the YouTube channel. Always subscribe to that. As I create new videos, I post them online. You'll be notified at professormesser.com/YouTube. And you can also follow me on Twitter, professormesser.com/Twitter. And somebody mentioned this week, I need to do a better job of my Twitter. I always send out my study group information. I send out my A+ pop quiz of the day on Twitter. They said, do more stuff on Twitter. And I think they're right. I really need to do a lot better with that. Let's also have a look at what you missed last month on the study group. I archive all of these. They're on the Professor Messer website. You go to the list of videos for the course you want, and at the very bottom is a replay of all of these. So if you weren't watching last month, you missed questions like, what are the differences in the Windows versions, Windows 2000 and Windows XP and Windows Vista and Windows 7? When would you use a loopback plug? How does SCSI termination work? Does my study group count towards A+ continuing education units? And what are those continuing education units? Can I explain the grading on the 701 and 702 exam? Maybe you'd watch it just for that one right there. And I'm looking to take my A+ certification soon. What should I look over? Well, there you go. And how important are IT certificates versus a bachelor's degree or vice versa? So there's quite a few things we talked about last month. Make sure if you're interested in any of those that you go back and look at that study group. We have a completely different group of questions today. Before we get into those, I also want to let you know that there is a FAQ that CompTIA puts out about the continuing education units. If you are somebody who has your A+ certification and you want to renew it using those continuing education units, you can. Some people just prefer taking a higher level test, which of course will automatically renew your A+ as well. But if you wanted to collect those units and have those different credits, you can go out to certification.comptia.org/CEUFAQ and learn more about that. And this study group counts towards those units. So it might be something worth doing. Not only are you sitting at the study group and hopefully learning something, but you also have an opportunity to gain those credits as well. So one of the things that I also like to do in this study group, I told you we have the chat room on the Professor Messer website, but I like to get your feedback as well. I like to hear from you. And what I do during the study group is I ask questions. And the question I have for us today is, how long have you been studying for your A+ certification? And if you go to vot.rs and you use the number 975187, it will take you to a place where you can vote right now. We can look live at you voting on this question. And if you have a QR code reader on your mobile device, just point it at the screen right now. Take a snapshot of that QR code. It takes you right to the page as well. You don't have to type in a lot of numbers. And if you do that, you will see something like this, where I notice this little tiny up here where the does say how long have you been studying for your A+ certification, and your options are less than a month, 1 to 3 months, 3 to 6 months, 6 to 9 months, 9 to 12 months, and more than a year. So we've got a couple of options there to choose from. So notice as you're clicking through and putting in that, we can actually see it here. It's at vot.rs 975187. We have a few responses there. So this is one of the things that I also like to give you pop quizzes during the certification study group so that you can start thinking about the topics that we're going to discuss during the study group. And it helps to keep everyone focused on what we're trying to accomplish. I usually will have through the month about 50 or 60 different people that will vote on this, because you can vote after this is done. If you're watching the replay, you can go in and vote and see the results of this as well. And I usually get a lot more on less than a month, all the way up to 6 months. It kind of goes off a little bit after 6 months. And then more than a year tends to pop up, which tells me that not only do we have people that are just learning the beginnings and getting into the studying process, but there's some people that like to study over a very, very, very long period of time. That's very much like I like to study. I like to really read it, really understand it, really get a grasp of what it's trying to tell me, and then I can feel comfortable about taking the exam. And we'll talk today about how you can feel comfortable taking the exam. I think that's an important part of this whole process too, is not just learning the content, but also learning about how to take the exam. That's a huge part of it as well. So we're going to come back to some of these questions. I have others for you. It looks like we have a good mix today. It looks like a nice distribution across of the 20 people that have responded so far. So I think some of the topics we've chosen for today are going to fit very nicely with what you've planned to do with this. So let's get into your questions that you have sent me this month. And there have been quite a few. You guys have sent a lot of information in this month. I have one big question that comes in now every month, is that there are 2 A+ exams right now. There is a 700 series exam and an 800 series exam. So you'll notice that a number of months ago, CompTIA introduced an updated version of the A+. This is not an upgrade. Well, I guess you can kind of think of it that way, is a eventual replacement for the 700 series exam. 700 series exam came out about 4 years ago. So the 800 series exam, brand new. There's new topics. They got rid of some of the old things. It's a fresh, brand new exam with all the latest types of technology that you would expect to see. So you could take that exam right now. But here's the thing that throws folks, especially if you're just getting into this. You can also take the 700 series exam right now. You can take both. It's a little bit of a challenge when you start looking at it, because the 700 series exam expires in August, at the end of August. That's a long time. Now, the reason CompTIA does this is relatively obvious. They want to make it so that if you've been studying and studying and studying your A+ exam, and then suddenly the 800 series exam is released, they don't want to make it so that you can't take your exam. You've been studying certain types of information for that exam. They want to give you plenty of time to study and pass whatever you happen to be studying for. Well, this becomes a bit of a challenge in people's minds, because they're thinking, is one better than the other? Should I think about it differently? Is there a different way to go about doing this? And which one should I take? I generally recommend that you take the latest exam. There's a lot of advantages to doing that. Not only are you able to walk in and tell a prospective employer, oh yes, I have the latest A+ exam. I don't know about these other people you're talking to and interviewing, but you should make sure they have the latest exam. You can almost use that as a marketing of yourself in the interview. Now, the reality is, whether you have taken the 700 series exam or the 800 series exam, you're A+ certified. And there is no There's no bridge exam to go between. That's why you always have to keep this A+ certification up to date. There's a 3-year renewal process there that you have to go through. If you've not renewed in 3 years, you lose your A+ exam. That means I could have gotten the 700 series exam and simply renewed it. So if you're in that position, I'm going to turn it around now. What if somebody comes in and says, I have the latest A+ exam? Well, if you're in that position where you took the older one, you can tell the prospective employer, oh yes, and I have the A+ certification as well, but A+ certifications have to be constantly renewed. And of course, mine is renewed as well to the latest edition of the exam. So you shouldn't feel bad about not taking the 800 series, because ideally you would only take the exam one time and you can simply renew it to keep it up to date. You can always find the exam requirements on the CompTIA website. We're going to talk about that more near the end of our study group today. But always go and look at the exam requirements to understand what are the differences. And if you go to the Professor Messer website at professormesser.com/FAQ, frequently asked questions, I have a series of videos, little short 1 to 2 minute videos there that describe things like the differences between those exams. Which one should I take? What is the distance between the exams? Should I take both at the same day? Should I wait? Is there a certain time frame I should think about? So you should do that and consider those things as well. So if you're looking at the exam, take those things into account and figure out which version you're going to take and just take it. Then you'll have your A+ certification. Let's get into some of the Q&A that we have for you today. I've got another question for you before we start things off. The question that I have is this one. Grab your QR code readers and have a look at that. You can see which Windows utility can provide you with a long-term record of previous errors or activities. So this is something that you've got some options here. So I'm going to wait a moment so you can get that QR code in here. Your options are Performance Monitor, Internet Explorer, Computer Management, Control Panel, and Event Viewer. Now I'm going to flip over. We can see how many respondents we have here, but which Windows utility can provide you with long-term records of previous errors or activities? There's some key words there, isn't there? There's some interesting words you should keep in mind. So there's your options: Performance Monitor, Internet Explorer, Computer Management, Control Panel, Event Viewer. We got 12 people that have responded. I'm going to wait till we get about 15 here, and then we'll reveal what we think the answer is. So there's some, whenever you're parsing out a question on the CompTIA exam, you should be focusing on certain key words. And if we look at this particular question, we're looking at Windows utility, we're looking at long-term recording, we're looking at errors and activities. So keep those things in mind. And also for your CompTIA exams, I did this during our weekly pop quizzes this week. Look for the word not. Which one of these things is not? Because I'll put that into a daily pop quiz and people will send me a message saying your answer is wrong. The answer in your pop quiz is not correct. I'm going to say, yes, it is. Go read it again. And then they reply back, oh, I missed the word not. It's so easy to miss that. So don't miss that. Now, this one doesn't have the word not. So we really are looking for Windows utility, long-term record, previous errors or activities. I've talked long enough. Let's show the results. And we see that one person said Performance Monitor, 2 people said Computer Management. I fooled nobody. 25 of you said, well, that's the Event Viewer. No kidding. It is the long-term record. Now, I'm tempted. I threw in Performance Monitor to try to grab somebody. So I caught somebody on that one, because Performance Monitor is a way you can look at stats, but those are more real-time statistics. Now, granted, you could save it over the long term, but it doesn't show you errors. And it really doesn't show activities. It really shows metrics. It really shows higher level statistics. So that would not be the best answer here. Computer Management is really a place you can go to do a lot of different things, including look at the Event Viewer. But that itself is not the utility that shows you the events. It is indeed the Event Viewer. So good job, folks. You did a good job getting to that one. And it really rolls into the question we got here, which is once you find the result of Event Viewer, how do you resolve the problem? Aha! See, knowing Event Viewer is one thing. Fixing the problem, a completely different thing. How do you even go about doing that? So first let's back up a lot. Let's back up just a bit and let's look at Event Viewer, because I think that's an important place to begin. What is this Event Viewer? What can I find inside of it? And then we can talk about what we can do to resolve problems. So let me flip over to our Windows 7 desktop here. It's a little bit squished on your screen. I apologize that the zoom is not quite right with this, but if I go down to my Start button down here, you can kind of see some things that are here. I'll zoom up on this. And we go to our control panel. This is the control panel on any Windows device. Now I've got this set to my large icons. You may see it set to category on yours. Make this a little bit bigger for those of you watching. So here's the category view. That's the default view in Windows 7. I usually set mine to large icons or small icons because I'm old school and that's the way we used to do it. So that's the one I'm comfortable with because I can find everything. It's in alphabetical order. It's just easier for me. So if you're trying to hunt things down in category, you just can't quite find it, choose large icons or small icons and you'll be able to find those things. Now the event viewer, it's a tool that really your end users are not going to use. This should help you think about how to find this, because you may be asked on the exam, how do you start up Event Viewer? Here's some options. So, or you may be asked in your performance or your questions that are performance-based questions at the beginning of the exam, because now you're not just getting multiple choice, you're getting these that are performance-based. So that's an important consideration as well. And they may ask you, launch Event Viewer for us right here, right now. You have to go through your windows. And because this is something your end users don't use, it makes perfect sense that this would be in the administrative tools. So that's where we're going to choose administrative tools. And I've got quite a few administrative tools on here. Now I'm viewing these again by this smaller icon view, but you could choose other options in your windows to view this differently. Maybe we'll do really large icons so you can really see all of the different options that you would have available when going into your administrative tools. And this is what we're talking about for administrative tools: component services, computer management, event viewer, performance monitor, services, system configuration, task scheduler. Those are administrative. Your users would never go in here. Maybe your power users might, but most users, they don't care about performance monitor. They call you and say it's slow and you have to figure the rest out. Let's drill down into Event Viewer and have a look at this. The Event Viewer itself is an amazing wealth of information. There's a lot of detail in here, a lot of things you can view. Now I'm viewing this in Windows 7. It looks the same in Windows Vista. Looks a little bit different in Windows XP, but the concepts are exactly the same. So you should be able to use it in any of those three operating systems. Let's look at the Event Viewer and what we have on the left side of the Event Viewer. I'm zoomed up here, so this thing's sliding around the screen. So let me make it so you can see it a little bit better. The Event Viewer itself has some options on the left side. Whatever you choose on the left side is going to determine what the center view looks like. And on the right side of the screen are some actions that you can use depending on what you're looking at that time. On the left side, you can see there's a lot of different categories in the Windows 7 and the Vista version. There are custom views, which show administrative events. There are Windows logs, and this is generally what you will see if you go into the Windows XP, the Server 2003 type views, is the application log, the security log, the setup log, the system log, the forwarded events. There are also applications and services logs. These are some additional logs that you could see that show hardware events, Internet Explorer, key management service, media center, some additional Microsoft apps, including Windows, and a lot of different details in there. I love the Event Viewer in the Windows 7 view because it gives you so much, and Windows PowerShell. So let's just go up to something like administrative events. And you notice when I choose that, the whole screen changes. The middle changes and my actions on the right side change. But this is where you start to see what's going on. Everything has a timestamp. You can see everything that's happened. You can also see what type of events you're getting. Now in my administrative events, I'm logging things that have a warning or an error. And you can see, boy, it really says warning. There's the yellow sign and the error is red. Some of these other events, I would imagine, let's go to application events, maybe something like informational. So it's just telling you things like there is, let's choose one, the search service. The Windows search service started. The Windows search service started. The Windows search service started. That's something that's informational. It tells you it happened. If you were trying to find out if that search service started, why did I choose this one? Then you would be able to find that very easily in your view, and you go, okay, it started okay. There wasn't a problem associated with that. But our question this week was, how do I solve these problems? So let's find one that's an error. Now, here is one right here. Now, there is no single answer to this, I'm afraid, but this is a message that came through the administrative events. I picked it because it was a red error message. And it says the vol snap is the source in event ID 36. And it says the shadow copies of volume C were aborted because the shadow copy storage could not grow due to a user-imposed limit. Now, notice that doesn't tell you what to do. It tells you all about what happened. It tells you, yep, it came from this machine. It came from the system log. Volsnap was the source. That's the service or the executable or the process that caused this. There are details here if you drill down, and if you've ever drilled down into the details, you know this gets a little bit crazy. Let me go back to the event there. Notice it gives you a lot of details. But this is your challenge now, is now that you've been given all of this information, what do you do with it? How do you resolve the problem? And unfortunately, there's no single answer. The answer that I think is the appropriate answer is you copy that message and you paste it into google.com. See how easy that was? And then, of course, you get 50 answers, and one of them is right. So the part of our job that's the hard part is figuring out which one of those is right. That's one of those things that the plumber comes in, he tightens something and bills you $100. He says, $100. You came in, you spent 30 seconds on it. He said, I'm not billing you for time. I'm billing you because I know which one of those things to twist. So you're getting paid because you know which one of those Google answers is going to be the right one. So the key here, though, I think in half of your struggle of fixing a problem, more than half of your struggle of fixing a problem like this, is finding what the problem is and identifying what the issues are. Once you have that, the rest of this is pretty basic. Now that you know what the problem is, you understand why that error is occurring, you can search for an answer. And the hardest part sometimes is finding the problem. It's all in your event log. Everything you want is probably going to be stored in this event viewer. There's some problems that will just tell you, I aborted. I had a blue screen. This application failed. It failed to start. Well, that's a little bit more of a challenge. You don't have a lot of details associated with that. But this is a very, very good way of going through the process of doing that. And that's because the event viewer is a great place to go. I think if you're planning to do any type of serious troubleshooting on a Windows device, make sure that you spend a lot of time understanding event viewer and being able to work with that. So before we look at more about event viewer, I'm going to flip over to the chat really quick and we'll see what's here. Notice other people are saying, yeah, there's other ways to get to Event Viewer. You can start it in so many different ways. Make sure you know all of those different methods to be able to get Event Viewer going. This is one of those things that this is in the chat. People are going, yes, and server, yep, the user ID. Google the event ID. Very good example, David says in the chat room. There's some events, whenever you're looking at the specific error, there may be for that app certain event IDs that come up associated with that. So very, very useful to find that too. So let's now, and for your A+ exam, before we get away from Event Viewer, for your A+ exam, you have to know what Event Viewer does. You have to know how to start it. You have to know what's inside of it. And of course, it's part of the 802 exam. And of course, we have videos for that as well. You can always go in and watch our videos on Event Viewer where I take you just through a 5-minute overview of Event Viewer and some of the things you can do with it. And David, yes, in the chat room mentions go to the command line. Just go run event VWR or run that from the command prompt. Very, very simple to pop up that display and have it there. And there's other utilities you can get from Microsoft where you can even view these things at the command line itself. You don't even have to start the graphical. That's well outside the scope of the A+ exam, but I think that gives you an idea of some of the things that you can do with the Event Viewer. Another question for you, get your QR codes reader. Do not answer in the chat room this question. Do not answer this question in the chat room. There we go. Which one of these Windows commands would provide you with the size of a file on the hard drive? On the hard drive. Which one would tell you and you've got some options here. So I'm going to flip over. You're not going to see what I'm doing here. Grab your QR code reader because you do have some options available to look at on that view. The question is, let's see if I can find it. I've got a lot here. Which one of these Windows commands would provide you? And my screen is doing a lot of different things here with the size of a file on the hard drive. I'm getting there on my side. Okay. Now, they got a lot of you are voting already. Your options are check disk, format, the dir command, the edit command, and the md command. So, which of these Windows commands would provide you with the size of a file on the hard drive? This is another important part of the A+ exam, of course, is that in these performance-based questions that you get prior to going to the standard multiple choice fare of questions, you are sometimes prompted to perform a task. It may be that you're presented with a command prompt and it says, how would I see the size of a file? Or how would I delete a file? Or how would I look at the contents of a particular directory? And you have to be able to perform that at the command line. Now, there are other things they may ask you. There may be matching questions. There may be fill in the blanks. There may be other things they do with their performance-based questions. But the point is that it's not going to be a multiple choice question for these. So you also have to know these pieces as well. We have 35 respondents. What could possibly be the answer for the command? And some of you chose dir. 24 of you did. Most of you did. I didn't fool anybody with this one either. Check disk, of course, is the command that tells you the size of the storage device itself and also checks for any types of errors, but doesn't tell you the size of a particular file on the hard drive. The format command, don't use that one because that deletes everything and resets everything on your file system. You probably don't want to format normally. It certainly won't tell you the size of a file. It'll delete the file. That's not what we want either. There's the edit command, which edits files, edits text files. That could possibly tell you the size of the file when you're saving it. That's not a very good way to determine the size of a file. You want to know something much easier. And of course, for your A+ exam, they very often ask you, what is the best choice? I probably could have put it this one. What is the best choice what is the best Windows command to be able to find the size of a file? So that's an important consideration as well. And MD makes a directory, doesn't really do anything with files. So that's one of the things when you get into those that you also have to think about how you're going to deal with. And I mentioned files and file systems because one of the questions that came in this month was about file systems. And I think that's where you really get into understanding more about controlling and understanding what you can do with the file system when there's a problem. When you boot your computer up and you're having a problem with your system and you're just trying to get it to work properly and you get an error before the operating system even starts, there's ways that you can resolve this. There's ways that you can absolutely take care and resolve those particular problems. So let's look at how you would make that happen. I think there is a couple of things we can do. So you're booting your system and you want to know, first you need to know the process. You need to get into the understanding what happens when you hit the power button. Because if you know that process, you can almost watch every step along the way. As your computer is booting up, you go, yep, there's where it did this. Okay, it moved to the second stage. Yep, here's where, oh, it failed at that point. All right, I know what to do. So let's look at that. The first thing that happens when you power on your computer has no idea what to do. It's a dumb machine. It doesn't have any knowledge of what storage you have. Everybody has a different hard drive. They have different numbers of hard drives. Everybody's computer is a little bit different. So how does your computer know even what to do to begin with? Well, that's because there is a BIOS on your computer's motherboard. That's your basic input-output system. You have to have a BIOS because when your computer starts up, it knows to look for a BIOS and find that BIOS and run whatever code is on that BIOS. So that's an important thing. If your BIOS isn't working, if you perform a BIOS update and you've gone through the process of updating the BIOS and you pull the power right in the middle of the update, now your BIOS isn't any good any longer. You may have just bricked your machine. So that's why it's so important when you do a BIOS upgrade, because this is the very first thing the computer does. If the BIOS isn't there, your computer is not going to start. Everything is going to start with that. And the BIOS goes through and checks a lot of different things on your computer. It performs something called a power on self-test. You may have heard us call this the POST command, the power on self-test command. That is a quick check. Just the bare minimums. Is memory on, and do we have memory in here? Can we use that? Oh, good. Is there a video connected to this so that the end user can see things? Yes, there's video. It doesn't go through an expansive, detailed analysis of how good your video is. It's simply seeing if video exists. Is there a keyboard plugged into your computer? I mean, because you're going to need to type something eventually, and if there's no keyboard, maybe we shouldn't even start up the computer yet. And it may give you a prompt. No keyboard connected. Connect the computer, press a key, and let's continue. So it checks make sure all these things are there and make sure that everything is working. And then it looks for a device on the computer that is bootable. And that's an important consideration, is it finds whatever device has been configured in the BIOS as the boot device. And we talk about this sometimes when you're trying to boot from the DVD-ROM or the CD-ROM in your computer, you're trying to get it started, you have to go into your BIOS and tell your BIOS, okay, if you're booting up, first check the CD-ROM drive. If nothing is there to boot from, check this hard drive. If nothing is there to boot from, check this SSD drive. If nothing's there, check the USB drive. And you can mix those around. You can change the order of the boot. And that's how your BIOS knows, your system, when it starts up, once it's finished the post, it sees all these devices, says, now which one did you tell me to boot from? Oh yeah, DVD-ROM. Let me go check that. And it goes out to the DVD-ROM and it boots from there as long as there's a bootable DVD-ROM in there. Or if there's nothing in the DVD-ROM, it goes to your hard drive and then boots from your hard drive. And it's looking on the hard drive, once it finds that device that's listed, it looks for something called an MBR. Now, there are other methods that are outside the scope of the A+ exam that are a little more advanced at being able to partition and set up the way your computer boots. But we'll talk about MBRs here and being able to use this. But it is generally the first sector of the drive. It's usually this first section of the storage device that you are looking at. And every storage device has different methods of storing information on it, but it's the first part of the drive that your boot process is going to. Your MBR knows all of the different partitions that are on your computer, and it goes through that process. The MBR is now understanding everything you've configured on that device. Now, this is an important consideration. If your MBR has been corrupted in some way, then it's not going to know any of the other partitions. You may have a Windows partition, you may have a Linux partition, you may have an older Windows partition, you may have many different partitions. Maybe you set one up for data on the drive. The MBR goes bad, then it's not going to know any of those partitions. That's a little bit of a challenge. And so, of course, when you have a problem booting your system, this is an important place where you may have to rebuild that MBR to be able to get it to work properly. I was working this week. There was a series of malware, happened to be centralized in South Korea, that once the malware loaded, it corrupted your MBR. Just first thing, corrupted the MBR. That's this week. So it's very possible that someone could bring you a machine that says, this gives me a boot error. This is a problem. And the chat room's way ahead of me asking, well, how the heck do you rebuild that? How do you get out of it? Oh, just wait, I'm going to tell you. Once we have checked for that bootable partition, once MBR says, well, I got a bunch of stuff on here, and if you ever go through the process of manually setting up these partitions, you know that you have to set one of those partitions as the bootable partition. You have to be able to say, yes, it's this bootable partition that I want to go to. So the MBR says, we got a lot here, but you've set one of these to be bootable. Let's go check into that bootable partition. So it goes over to that partition. On that partition is some additional code that starts the operating system. We generally call that boot sector code. Sometimes there's bootloaders that are installed there. It runs the bootloader that gets the operating system going. So it's a multi-step process to be able to do this, one after the other. And there could, of course, could be problems anywhere along the way. So we just talked about problems with the MBR. We can also have problems with that boot sector as well on the operating system. Your MBR can get corrupted. The boot sector code can get corrupted. So we've got places where things can go wrong. And these days, malware, you're making changes to the operating system, adding new partitions with third-party software might corrupt the MBR or cause it not to be read properly. So what can we do? What are things that we can do? Well, for Windows XP, you would correct the master boot record. We're just talking about the MBR, that first sector. We start up the Windows Recovery Console. You're generally going to need your Windows XP installation media to do this unless you have previously installed the recovery console onto your computer, which you can do. And if you go and look at the video that's in the 802 series I created that goes into working at the recovery console and the command prompt, I go through and demonstrate this process for you. So you can see exactly the way you would start this up. There's a lot of information in there. You first need to recognize and understand which drive am I going to run this on. There's a command called map that will do that, and it will list out the physical drives on your computer. And once you understand which drive you want, you run a program called fixmbr. There you go. And it fixes it. Just takes a second. Now, if you have multiple drives and you want to choose a particular drive, just use the device name that you found when you did the map command. And that way you can define, maybe not the one I boot with, but maybe this one over here. I want to fix the MBR with that one because later on I might want to boot from that one as well. Now, it's a little bit different in Windows 7 and Windows Vista. In those operating systems, you use a command called bootrec, boot recover, BOOTREC. And you use a command in there /fixmbr. So similar, I'm going to flip back here. Fixmbr was the command in XP. In Vista and 7, it's bootrec /fixmbr. Now that's just going to fix the master boot record on a drive. I'm going to zoom up a little bit so you can see what you get. If you just type in bootrec, you've forgotten, what do I type in? It's bootrec /something. It will tell you fixmbr, fix boot, scan OS, rebuild BCD. So that's one of the ways that you can go through and resolve and rebuild the master boot record that's on your computer. Be a good way to do that. Now, I also mentioned you can have problems with that boot record that's on the partition itself, that's on the volume itself. In Windows XP, if you also wanted to rebuild that particular section, you would start up the recovery console in XP and use the command diskpart to see what the partitions are, and then you would run the program fixboot to fix the boot sector. Fixmbr, fix boot. And most of the time you're doing both of these just to make sure you fix everything. Sometimes it requires that you do both of them to be able to fix everything. If you're in Windows 7 or Windows XP, it's that same bootrec command, but instead of /fixmbr, you use /fixboot, and it writes a new boot sector. So there's some very easy ways to go into and fix that boot process. So if you're getting an error that the MBR doesn't have any bootable partitions, or you're not able to see any operating systems on your drive, there's a number of different errors. I've listed them out in the video that talks about the recovery console and the command prompt. So you can get an idea of what you would expect to see, and then I demonstrate for you exactly how to make that happen. So very, very easy to go through and resolve those boot problems. It's very daunting at first. You start your machine up and suddenly it gives a boot error. And sometimes you're thrown by that. You're taken aback a bit because you get into these situations where now my machine's not even booting. I'm not getting Windows. I'm not getting a login prompt. Nothing's starting. That's okay. We got you covered. We've got things that you can do to resolve that particular issue. Just run these commands. It's remarkable. You run them. It's really fast. It only takes a moment. Fixmbr. Boom. Done. Fix boot. Boom. Done. Restart. Windows XP suddenly starts up again. You can finally take a breath, and it works okay. All right. You got your QR code readers ready? I got another question for you. Make sure you do not answer in the chat room. Do not answer. Do not answer. This is not the chat room you're answering in. Do not answer because I'm going to give you a question and you'll need to have your QR code reader or type in the VOT.RS. The question is, what method is commonly used to convert a number of internal IP addresses to a single external IP address? A little bit kind of a vague question. It's one of these things where you'll know it when you see it. You'll know what that answer is when you find it. So you've got a bunch of internal IP addresses and you want to be able to convert them into an external address. This is commonly done in an organization when you are trying to communicate out to the internet. But there's other ways that you could take advantage of that as well. And I'm going to hopefully start up the right one here. Your options are network address translation. Another option is distributed denial of service. Another option is domain name services, DHCP, and subnetting. So what method is commonly used to convert a number of internal IP addresses to a single external IP address? This is also a process that happens a lot in your house. If you got a router that's connecting you to a cable modem, to a DSL line, this is also happening somewhere along those as well. So whether you're an enormous organization that all you do is tons of networking, or maybe you just have a configuration at your house right now, you're viewing this over this particular kind of configuration, because I am converting a lot of internal IP addresses to an external IP address as well right now to send this traffic out. We've got 29 respondents. Let's see what the answers are. 21 of you said network address translation. 2 of you said domain name services. 5 of you said DHCP because it's a bunch of letters and it sounds good. And 4 of you said subnetting. Well, as you can see, a lot more of you said network address translation. That's exactly what this is. We're translating one address to another. Generically, that's what network address translation does. The specific kind of network address translation that is converting internal IP addresses to an external IP address is often called PAT, or port address translation. It's also called source address translation. You can hear it talked about in different ways. So didn't fool 23 of you. Got this absolutely right. You knew exactly what was going on there with the address translation. Now, distributed denial of service, DDoS, is one that's used to actually prevent an organization from being able to use the network. That doesn't do translations of addresses. That brings people down. When you talk about companies that their internet connection is no longer working because there was denial of service attacks from many, many different places from a distributed section of the internet, that's what you get. Nobody was fooled with that one. Domain name services, that was one I put in there just to fool people, and I only fooled 2 people. So sorry, but this is one that will take a domain name that you have put in, like www.google.com. Your domain name services will convert that to an IP address. So not quite the same thing as converting an internal address to an external. That does a domain name to an IP, or vice versa. We can also reverse that. DHCP is Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. That's one that gives your device an address automatically. It's not one that's converting any addresses. And of course, subnetting is just a way to separate different subnets, to separate your network into different pieces. It's not talking about specifically translating or converting any addresses either. So a lot going on there. And that was, I think, we are all on the same page here. You've got network address translation as the answer to that one. We've got another question that came in this month was from PS, who said, what's the difference between a default gateway and a router? What is the difference there between those two things? Because you see this all the time. You're configuring something on your machine and it says, put in the default gateway or put in the gateway. And then you put it in. It's like, well, that was the router. Why didn't you just ask for the router? Wouldn't that have been a lot easier if you had just asked me for the router? Guys, that's what we call those things. So I've already kind of given you a little bit of the answer here between what those things are. I think we also get into situations as well when we start talking about what are these things and how do they work. So first, let's look at how you would address things, how you would configure addressing on your computer. You need 3 things. At a bare minimum. You need really 4 to do things on the internet very well. But the first thing is an IP address. Every machine has to have its own IP address. Every house on your block has a different address. I wouldn't know where to deliver the mail unless I knew exactly the address to send it to. So everybody gets a different address. Pretty obvious. Everything needs to be unique. You can't share this address with anyone. So it's you and only you that's going to have this unique IP address. You also have to have something in TCP/IP called a subnet mask, and that's a piece of information that defines what subnet you happen to be a member of. Now, one of the challenges with this is that the subnet mask is something that's only stored in your computer. You don't generally send this information out on the network. You can't look at a packet trace and determine subnet masks. You can make a guess sometimes, but it's not something you're absolutely sure of until you ask for the person who has created this network and you ask them, what's the subnet mask for the subnet we happen to be on? And the last thing you need is something called this default gateway or gateway. This was a term, in fact, all of these terms, IP addressing, subnet masks, gateways, all of these terms were created many, many, many years ago when we first started doing TCP/IP version 4. This was something that was a relatively new way of communicating. We had never done anything like this before. Now, of course, it runs the world. The internet is everything going on. This and using IPv4 and in some cases IPv6. So these addresses weren't something that were commonly known. In fact, we didn't know what a router was. We kind of had the idea of what routing traffic might be like. We had different subnets, and instead of them being a router, it was generically called a gateway because it was the gateway to the outside. It was the gateway to everything else on the network. So you put in your IP address, your subnet mask, and this gateway. So that's why when we talk about working with these IP addresses and configuring them in your system, you'll find that information in some cases is in your brand new operating system, but it's kind of old in the way that it works. In fact, let's have a look at this. I think I can flip us over back to our Windows 7 device. Back in my control panel, I've got my network and sharing center, and I've got different settings in here that I can choose. Notice I'm on one machine and I can connect to a network. I can troubleshoot problems. Let's look at our adapter settings. And under my adapter settings, it's kind of cut off there on my local area network connection. If I right mouse click and look at my properties, I've got a lot of different protocols running on my computer. I've got IPv4, I've got IPv6, and I wanted to show you specifically the IPv4 properties because notice even in Windows, we use that term IP address, subnet mask, default gateway. It's Windows 7. This is one of the latest ops, and if you look at Linux, you'll look at Windows 8, you'll look at any of the latest operating systems, they're all using the same nomenclature. They're all using the same terms to be able to understand these three things. So don't be thrown by that term default gateway. It really is referring to the local router interface on your subnet. It's a very, very easy way to look at the information that's on your subnet. Now, one of the things I also mentioned to you was that there was some other options on that question was DHCP. The DHCP options obviously didn't apply. That was to get an automatic address on here and be able to get an automatic view of the world. So don't be thrown by DHCP. I wanted to put that slide up just so you can see that DHCP was that automated process and being able to use that. Okay. I think that was a pretty good question. I'll get into these weird questions a lot. Where'd that come from? So when you talk about these odd acronyms, we, of course, this month's acronym is one where we go through and look at one of these acronyms. The acronym today, don't answer in the chat room, do not put this into the chat room, is, what is SATA? You go to vot.rs and vote using 806385, and you can tell me, what is SATA? What is that? What's up with the SATA? What is that thing? I want to know more of the SATA. So vote at vot.rs. and use 806385, and I will do the same thing on my side and pull up, because I've got some options for you. You're not just typing this in at a fill in the blank. You're giving me some options, and the options are, let me hide the results so that we can have a look. The options are a serial address translation attachment, a serial advanced technology attachment, a secondary address telnet access, and a serial address technology access. Boy, all of those are tongue twisters. What is this serial attached advanced telnet access address thing? This is one of the challenges you get into when doing anything in technology, is we love to make these abbreviations and acronyms of all of these different pieces. And of course, this question about SATA, we have to know what SATA is. Now, this actually goes back. This isn't something we just named. This one goes way back. The naming, the root of this naming goes back to some of the original storage we were using. Let's see what most people put as the answer. 3 of you said serial address translation attachment. 5 of you said serial address technology access. None of you said secondary address telnet access. And again, I didn't fool anybody. Serial advanced technology attachment was absolutely the correct answer for this. Now, this is serial advanced technology attachment. Let's break this down to figure out what this name means. There's always a meaning to these things, isn't there? So we want to be able to see that. So let's have a look. There's a standard called SATA, and this came up not only because of the question that was asked, but it came up, and who asked the question? Let me flip back to that slide. CP asked the question this month about SATA, and somebody said, there's SATA and there's PATA. When did we start calling it PATA? Well, we started calling it PATA when we created SATA, because up to that point, it was called AT attachment. And that was it. It was ATA. It was address. It was. Now I'm confusing myself. It was Advanced Technology Attachment, ATA, and it was done in a parallel mode. But we didn't call it parallel because there was nothing to compare it with. When we came out with serial, we realized, well, we now need to give the old one a new name, so we started calling it PATA. So the serial AT attachment has 3 different standards. So far, there's more coming, but so currently there's a SATA revision 1, revision 2, and revision 3. And you can see the latest SATA revision 3 is 6 gig a second. That is 6 gigabits per second, not 6 gigabytes per second, not 6G. It's 6 gigabits per second of total throughput. So there's another consideration to keep that. And really, and important in the chat room, the SATA, when we created it, we had to rename the old one from ATA to PATA. We didn't call it ATA. We called it ATA, and then we stuck a P in front of it. It's the same thing. It's now just called PATA, but we didn't change anything. It's the same technology in the way that it works. If you're trying to find your SATA port, let's zoom up. Hold on. There they are. So on this motherboard, it even says serial ATA 6 gigabits per second, and you can see those SATA revision 3.0 ports right on the motherboard. They're relatively small. There's these tiny little ports. Very, very nice to have that there. Very, very easy to find on the motherboard. They're not really big. They don't take up a lot of room. And they're very simple to plug into. Unlike the pins that were associated with ATA or PATA, the SATA is much easier to plug in and to be able to use. Another nice part about SATA is on the left here, we have the ATA, the PATA cable. Well, when we went to SATA, here's the data cable for SATA. That's a huge difference. That's because with PATA, we were sending data down every single one of these 40 pins. And the data was going down all 40 of those at the same time in a parallel mode, parallel ATA. For SATA, it's a serial connection. It's like the connection on your network. It's like the connection on a serial link. We're sending data down one side and sending back on the other. So you don't have to have a lot of wires inside of this. The serial communication is also much easier to maintain. You don't have to worry about a lot of the challenges associated with sending all of that signal down one side and making sure they all get there at the same time. Much easier to manage on this side. So you'll notice whenever you look at a machine that has PATA drives, there's all these ribbon cables everywhere. You look at a server with SATA, and there's just one data cable going to each one. There's usually a separate cable for power as well. The SATA drive itself, here's an example of a SATA drive. Here's the SATA data and the SATA power. Notice the power much larger than the data. This drive is one that was built very early on with SATA because they also had this Molex power connector on the side as well. You could use either the SATA power or the Molex connector on there. That gives you some options if you're replacing or upgrading an existing computer at the time. And if you plug them in, here's one plugged in with the Molex. If you were using SATA connectors for everything, you would obviously plug in the SATA power on that side. But that certainly got rid of a lot of the cable mess. And it's not only important because it looks better inside of the case, but you're able to have airflow go through much easier with these much smaller SATA cables. You're not filling up the case or blocking the air from being able to go. So you often got a cooler case, a more effective cooling inside of that to be able to use it. One of the questions that we often get about the test itself is, how much should I really study for these things? And it used to be I could give you a single answer on this. I used to be able to say, oh, well, I know exactly how much you study. You go and you grab the exam requirements document, you look through it, use it as a checklist, and you're done. And that was it. Made it very, very simple because you were going through this process. It was all multiple choice questions. If you know everything you need to know, and you're done. But obviously, CompTIA has changed now their A+ exam. They changed the latest Network Plus exam. They changed the Security Plus exam. And they even changed their other security exam. They have a CASP exam, a Security Advanced Practitioner exam. They changed all of these to include not just multiple choice questions, but performance-based questions as well. So you can't just memorize multiple choice questions any longer. You have to perform some type of task. It may be a mix and match. It may be a fill in the blank. It may be do a command line function. But now you need to know how to do much more than you've ever done before. Now, I've partnered with my friends at GTS Learning. They have a program that can also take you through the process of not just understanding the multiple choice side of things, but they have labs you can use as well. And if you go look out at ProfessorMesser.com/freestyle, there's someone they've created this online system that has books, it has sample exams, there are even labs available for you to take. This is a brand new addition to what they're doing at GTS Learning. The labs are amazing. They actually bring up a virtual environment on your screen, and this virtual environment launches Windows. So that's one of the challenges you've always seen with the A+ exam is that there's, in the 700 series, Windows 2000. On the 800 series, you've got XP and Vista and 7 added onto that. So you've got all these different operating systems you have to know how to use. Well, I don't have 4 different systems. I don't have these operating systems to load into a virtual machine. Maybe my machine can't run a virtual machine because I don't have a lot of memory. I don't have a lot of hard drive space. What do? Well, they've created these labs that will have this interactive view. It brings up a version of Windows as a remote screen. So you don't have to have any resources on your computer, or certainly relatively small number of resources, because it's a remote control session all in the browser. So you also don't have to load any extra software to make this work. You can change whatever you want in that operating system. You can reload the MBR. You can rebuild the MBR. You can rebuild the boot sector. You can do all of those things we just talked about. Doesn't change a thing on your computer. So you can feel comfortable. And if you break something, you say, reset that machine to the way it was. It resets it all back. Now, the part that I've looked at over the years was that these things were pretty expensive if you ever wanted to be able to do this. But one of the things that they've done is for the Professor Messer study group, this is something that interests you. Go to ProfessorMesser.com/freestyle labs. You'll get a special price, $99 for these labs. So if you're somebody who is struggling to get that hands-on that you need to feel comfortable with the performance-based questions, this might be a really good option for you. So have a look at it. You can even try it for free by going out to ProfessorMesser.com/freestyle labs and have a look at what's available on that A+ side. You may find some very useful capabilities to be able to use that. I get questions from you every month about the test itself. So let's go through a few of those and what we might be interested in knowing about. There is questions I get about the exam itself. And interestingly enough, maybe oddly enough, every month, here's one of the exams questions I get. And it's difficult to answer this one sometimes because it seems obvious, but a lot of people are trying to get their A+ exam, don't even realize who administers the exam. They're just getting started. They know nothing of the exam. So what I always suggest to people, I can tell you the answer to any of these things about the exam and how it works, but I think the best way to have a look at what the A+ exam is about is to go to the CompTIA website. And on the CompTIA website, see if I can bring up a view of this for you. You have, for the CompTIA exam, notice it talks about the 800 series exam and tells you everything you need to know about the exam right here at the bottom. It even tells you that the previous version, 701 and 702, are still available. And here's the exam. There's 801 and 802. Number of questions, maximum of 90. They might ask you fewer questions than 90. Some people have taken their exam. They've come back to me and said, they didn't ask me 90 questions. They asked me a lot fewer questions than 90. That's because every question has, or every test is done randomly. And they have certain questions that may be worth more than others. Maybe you just got a really, really hard test. Maybe there's smaller questions. I don't know. CompTIA doesn't tell us. We're kind of guessing with how that works. You have both multiple choice and performance-based questions, 90 minutes long for each one of those. You have to take both of those exams. You have to get a 675 on a scale of 900 to pass the 801. And for the 802, you have to get a 700 on a scale of 900. So if you're trying to figure out what should I be expecting when I walk in the door, you're going to get a maximum of 90 questions. You're going to get different kinds of questions, and you got to get either a 675 or 700. That's why I think the questions have different weightings, different number of points per question. There's not a percentage that you could look at. I think that's what a lot of people are asking about when they look at the A+ exam is what percentage should I be looking at to be able to pass? Well, I can't give you a percentage. I can give you something close, but it's not quite like that in being able to do it. So have a look at some of those things that you might be working with. I think if we ever start looking at doing more with the A+ exam, they'll put it right there on the A+ page. CompTIA is really good about updating information there. And that's why when you start to look at what's there in the performance-based questions, you might get questions like this, like what format will be used for the A+ certifications? What should I expect to see for the A+ certifications? And if you go to my frequently asked questions, I talk a little bit about performance-based questions on the exam so that you can get an idea of what you would expect to see on the exam. I'm going to bring up a view of this. There's another link, and I need to make a bit.ly link for this, for those pieces. There's another video that's a much longer video that goes through the entire exam experience and being able to see it. Let me bring up that view of the world and bring up this. I'm going to make a bit.ly right now while we're on here. It's on the comments on my YouTube page. Let's see if it takes us there. Oh, it's not there any longer. Well, there used to be a video there you could watch. That video is no longer there. So go to the one that's on my ProfessorMesser.com/FAQ page. There's a performance-based questions there. Let me bring that up so you can see it. I will ProfessorMesser.com/FAQ so you can have a look at these. The FAQ page gives you information right here about what performance-based questions are on the exam. Go right there and you'll be able to see exactly what you would expect for the performance-based questions. That becomes really useful. When we started this stream today, I got a question that's really one of my frequently asked questions. I see this one all the time. Hey, this is a big exam. There's a lot of questions on this exam. There's a ton of questions on this exam. It is a very broad exam. If you pass your A+, you know a lot about a lot, because you had to learn every little piece of the computer, every little piece of the operating system. And the question that came in the beginning of this stream, people have asked this in the middle, and I get this every month, is what should I study most when I take the test? And the answer, unfortunately, is there's nothing you should study most. What you should do is go out to the CompTIA website and download the objectives, read them, and use them as a checklist for your exam. The objectives list has everything in it. CompTIA is really good about providing you with detailed information about everything that is on the exam. You can't go wrong with this. If you are interested in the 800 series exam, you should go out to the CompTIA website and have a look at it. If you download it and have a look at it, here's the exam objectives for the 801 exam. Tells you exactly how much you will be asked about from a percentage perspective on the exam on each domain. And then it goes to details. Configure and apply BIOS settings. You should know how to install firmware upgrades. You should know everything about the BIOS component information on the RAM, hard drive, optical drive, and CPU. You should know how to set a boot sequence in your BIOS, how to enable and disable devices, how to set the date and time, how to understand what clock speeds are, and understand virtualization support in your BIOS. Except that's just the first two sections. We haven't even gotten into the exam yet. The exam has all of this in there. Keep going. Keep going. There's more pages. We're still in domain 1. Keep going. There's a domain 2 finally, networking. Let's keep it. Domain 3, domain 4, printers. Okay, okay, finally got to the end of it. Domain 5. That's 12 pages, really 11 if you get rid of the first page. That's a lot of detail to be able to pour through. A ton of information. Other organizations, Cisco doesn't give you that. Microsoft doesn't give you that. That's a huge amount of detail. So take advantage of that. Know that that's there and use it. That can really help you when you're trying to work out the exam and be able to use it. Ton of information. A lot of people, I'm taking my test tomorrow. Any last minute tips? And I tell them, have you downloaded the exam objectives? What's that? What's an exam objective? You don't even know what you're going to be tested on. You don't know for sure till you read the exam objectives. Go grab the exam objectives, print them out, put them on your screen, make it so that you can write on them or modify them on your PDF reader. If you have something that can modify the PDF, and check them off so that you know exactly what you should be expecting with that. Which brings up this question of, is it necessary? Is it really necessary to know CPU sockets for the exams? This is one of those rote memorization parts of the exam, understanding exactly what you should be expecting to know. And again, I go back to the exam objectives. I think that that's a great place to go, especially for this question. And I'm going to go to my exam objectives, and I'm going to pull up the section for the CPUs, because I think that will tell you a lot of what you need to know. And here's the challenge. Speaking of what you need to know, here is the section on the exam that talks specifically about sockets. You need to know different CPU sockets. So first, there's different types of sockets. There it is. It's listed as section 1.2 is CPU sockets. And there's not a lot of different kinds of sockets. I mean, just generic formats of sockets. You know, there's slots, there's a PGA, there's an LGA, there's different types of sockets. But I think what this question is really talking about is if I scroll down further, scroll, they ask you on the exam, this is new in the 801, wasn't like this in the 700 series. You need to differentiate, section 1.6, differentiate among various CPU types and features and select the appropriate cooling method. There's different cooling methods in here for this. And notice the socket types, they list out for you exactly the socket types they expect you to know. You need to know an Intel LGA 775, 1155, 1156, 1366. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 of them. On the AMD side, you have 940, AMD2, AMD2 Plus, practically the same thing. AMD3, AMD3 Plus, practically the same thing. FM1F, there's some similarities between all of these. But if I was to really count them out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And in reality, it's fewer than that because there's similarities that can help you between that. That's not a lot. If you've looked at some of the books, though, you've seen these books, there's like a million sockets they put in the book. I don't know why they do this. They list out every socket known to man, every CPU that has ever been made, that has ever been thought of, every CPU that was created back when the dinosaurs roamed the earth. I have no idea why they do that. You don't need to know that for your exam. That's way too much information. It's interesting. It's an interesting history lesson. I'll grant you that. It's interesting to know where things came from. But for your A+ exam, just go to the exam objectives. I think once you know those, you'll know everything you need to know. And if you get stuck on this and you just can't memorize it and it's driving you crazy and you can't get this done, just skip it. There's so much more to the exam than just the sockets. Don't worry about the socket piece. If that's throwing you, just ignore it. Just if they ask you, you'll get that one wrong. You might get one socket question. You might get two, I doubt it. But you might get none. So don't kill yourself. So also somebody in the chat room said there was a socket question. Don't tell us a lot. You signed a release that says, I can't tell you what was on the exam, but that's a good example. You got a socket question. You might get some of those. So it's important to read that exam objectives document. Every month I give you a link of the moment, and I try to give you something that can help you with what you're doing, that can give you some insight into not just getting the certification, but doing something with it. And there was a great article this week on Reddit that someone compiled because they asked the question on Reddit. And they searched through Reddit. They did a search for everything that was interview in the sysadmin subreddit. And they compiled everything together. Now, I will tell you that that Reddit, this is on the internet. There are adults here, and there's probably language inside of this that you might find non-professional, but you're warned. It's the internet. We're adults here. We're big people. This article happens to have some of those, just so you aren't offended at me sending you there. But if you go to bit.ly/interview-job, that'll take you very quickly to that. It's sometimes hard to find things on Reddit to search through it. So that we'll talk about as a really great summary in there of all of these things you should be prepared for. And it's people that he compiled posts from people that interview other people. I've talked about this. I interview people all the time. This is something that they say, well, I need you to interview this person for a technical position. So I'm going to ask technical questions. Or I'm going to ask you about you had a problem and how you resolved it, because I want to hear you go dive deep about the problem you had. I want to hear about the ones and zeros. I mentioned I have an associate. Whenever he has a technical interview, the first thing he asks is, tell me what ARP is. And I mean, he's interviewing people for very, very high-end technical positions. I mean, this is not an entry level. He's interviewing people that are going to be working on and in some of the biggest data centers in the world and dealing with people that manage those networks. First thing he asks is, tell me about ARP. and tries to get an answer back from that. I want to hear about ARP and what it does. And if he finds it interesting, not only do you get people, well, I'll tell you all about ARP. Yeah, here's how it works and what you expect to see. Some people don't know about ARP. Some people are stumbling around. Okay, well, I've figured out you're probably not who I want for this position. And if they get that right, well, tell me about proxy ARP. Tell me about when I would use proxy ARP. Tell me about where I would configure that proxy ARP in what device and what circumstances I would use it. So it goes really, really, really deep into some of these things. But those questions you get on the interview, you need to at least be prepared. And I think it's interesting in this document, they talk about knowing when to say, I don't know. That really can actually help you quite a bit. Oh, I've never worked with ARP before, or maybe you're in the wrong position at that point. But he asks, so tell me a situation where you've done this configuration that had the redundancy and high availability and did this thing and it had encryption and blah, blah, blah. Well, I've done something similar to that, let me tell you, but I don't know about that other piece. We haven't done much of those things before. Letting people know what you don't know or letting them know you're not lying to them. This can be helpful too. There's more of that in that article. It was a really nicely compiled article. It's at bit.ly/interview-job. So very, very useful to be able to see those things. Well, we've come to the end of yet another A+ study group. And I also want to, of course, remind you that if you'd like to track what we're doing here at Messer Studios throughout the month, you can follow us on Twitter at ProfessorMesser.com/Twitter. If you really wanted to help us, go out to ProfessorMesser.com/YouTube and subscribe. I want to get this channel to have maybe some additional bandwidth so it looks a little better from YouTube, and they like it when people are interested in the content. GTS Learning, again, if you want to know more about their special deal on their labs that you can have for the A+, you go to ProfessorMesser.com/freestyle labs. I've got also a Network Plus study group that I do every month. We'll do it a week from today. If you ever want to know what we're doing, you can always go out to ProfessorMesser.com/calendar and be able to get the calendar piece as well. Very, very useful to know when these things are popping up. I try to put an announcement like I did today on the website. And that, of course, I thank you as well. We weren't able or could not do any of these live study groups without your participation, without you being here live, without you in the chat room telling me what I've got right and what I've got wrong, answering questions for me, and sending me the questions so that we can put these things into the study group and answer them every month. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for attending. We will see you next month on the Professor Messer A+ Study Group.